essayist, chronicler of events, one of the major pro-people voice in Bengali literature, and another very distinguished panelist, Professor Radha Chakravarti, teaching in Ambedkar University, a very distinguished academician, poet, critic. Welcome both Anitaji and Radhaji.
Thank you so much.
We are talking about creative connections in a time when social distance has become the new normal, when division has taken over the theory of connections and theory of union. Now in a divided and completely devastated world, how we are going to see, how we are looking at creative connection and the connection of a writer with language, with literature, with the people, how we see ourselves connected to a world which is completely changing its color, completely changing the relationships. There was a time when we were talking about the global village. Now the global village has completely shattered, and now we can see that everybody is isolated into their own compartments, into their own four walls. So stay home, safe home has become the new norm. So in that time, in that pandemic panic, how as a writer we see our connection with the world, our connection with the language, literature and people. So my first question, I will start with Anitaji. You have written a lot about people. You know, your focus is always grounded with the people. You have written about the people of Kalahandi, people of Bastar, people of Mahanadi Valley. So in this time, in this particular time when we are suffering the disconnection, how you connect yourself to the world?
Thank you, Kedarji. I would say that one unique advantage a writer has, that she is eternally connected to the people. Nothing has changed. Mentally, I am saying that we are surrounded by the uncertainties of the pandemic. Yes, there are personal anxieties about the family. But I have sensed that never before I have felt so integrated with what is happening in the entire country. Every small thing, every disturbance happening anywhere is immediately impacting me. When the migrants started walking back to their homes, they lost their way, they were treated badly, people died on the road. There are issues when voices were not being communicated. It is only it's only physical distancing, all right. But our mind is much more alert at this point. And every day we are writing something or other. It is possible that whatever is going in the digital mode is going, but otherwise everything is stored for future. Will come out one day and we will come out and share whatever we have written during this time, whatever we thought. Nothing is going to be lost. And I would say that this is a time when our empathy has become much more strong with the people, much more powerful, and one thing Tagore had said in one of his poems, I literally feel my life has been pierced, and this sad tune is reflecting itself through my life, through my own physical existence. I would say this much is the present.
But don't you see that staying isolated, staying in a very faraway place, in a very safe four-wall, when we look at the pen of others who are walking on the road, do we really connect with them? Are they not a mere news to us? How do we connect with their real pen?
I would say that the connectivity is through the mind. It is true. It's isolation, and Even in a normal situation, we cannot be everywhere. But writing is something, our pain is something which is never taken away from us. So writing, the process of writing is on, sharing is on very much. And I look at it as a very, very strange situation, which is going to change. We come back again, and I don't lose hope. And I would like to preserve whatever I'm writing, keeping for the people for whom I write, and tell them once when we are all back together that yes, we are there. We are there together.
Okay, thank you, Radhaji. Now it's Radhaji. Actually, what is your takeaway? Radhaji is staying in Mumbai. Those is based in Kolkata, but she is staying in Mumbai. Now you are. What is your look? How you see the whole situation, this pandemic situation, the panic, the pain of people. I was reading one of your poems when you were talking about the pain of the people, the suffering of the people. So how we are really connected to the language of suffering, the language of pain uh, for now. I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Okay, I think my mic was off. I think the question you're asking is uppermost in the minds of all those of us who are socially distanced, physically distanced, but do not feel distanced from the reality outside the closed doors of our homes in which we are in lockdown. I think all the more at this time there is a need for language, for literature, for communication, to share and to express our sense of connectedness and solidarity with people everywhere, because I think this pandemic is a great leveler. In a certain way, it has connected us all in the realization that it does not distinguish between people who are privileged or underprivileged. It knocks at everyone's door, and it is the collective anxiety and responsibility of for all of us to think about how to deal with this new reality for our world. And I would agree with Anita that actually hope resides in language, in communication, in expressing ourselves. And I think at such a time, literature and the arts play a vital role in keeping hope alive, in keeping the imagination alive, but also in keeping our sensitivities and our awareness alive. I think that remains very, very important. So the more we are physically distanced, the more I think there is potential for language and literature to connect us in terms of our awareness of those who are distanced from us.
But when we're talking about awareness, Radhaji, now there are many layers of reality. If you are looking at the reality nowadays, the media is projecting one reality, political parties are projecting another realities, and followers of political ideologies, they are projecting different ideologies. So in these multi-layers of realities, what is the real actually? That's the most difficult thing to understand for a writer. Just what is the real reality? I'm putting that real reality. What is that actually? So how to identify that reality as a writer?
I think writers respond to multiple layers of reality anyway through their imagination, because words connect the imagination with the world outside. And to a great extent, writers are not just functionaries who mirror the world, and but they are also creators who can shape the world, who create worlds of the imagination through which they can express a transformative vision. And we see this so much in the history of how literature interacts with social reality. And I'm talking of writers like Tagore, on whom I've worked extensively. I'm talking of writers like Mahashweta Devi, on whom I've worked extensively. The impact, the power of the word is something that the writer holds in her hands, and the writer therefore can not only reflect reality or merely interpret what is going on, but also intervene. And that potential or that possibility of literature is, I think, what we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, okay. Like coming to Anita ji, Radhaji is talking about the intervention of a creative person to interfere into the life, interfere into the vastness of life. So how we are going to be a part of this world when everything is closed? When you are writing about Sukhvasi of Western Odisha, you are connected to those people. You are a part of those lives. Today, if I want to write about pandemic or about the life of migrants who are suffering on the road, I'm unable to go to them. I'm really cut off from their reality. So, how I am going to work now with that reality?
I would say that, each writer has a way of looking out for the truth. I entirely agree with Radhaji when she says that we do not exactly mirror whatever we are seeing. The search is on. It has become much more painful now. You were saying that there are so many viewpoints. You feel extremely pained when you have seen so many realities of the country, of the state interacting with its people exposed before your eyes. Sometimes you feel helpless that you know what the reality is and you are not able to go and stand with them. But also imagine, I look at the pandemic as a very, very temporary physical restriction on my movements. I have gone and been extensively all over Odisha, Chhattisgarh, parts of Bengal when I have written. I've been to Marathwada when I went to write Kaste. But suppose, but for some reason, I was physically impaired for a period of 6 months or a year. Do you think my mind will stop working? We have access to information. We have ability to, see the truth and we can analyze. Do you think we cannot hear this? We cannot
Right.
speak language? And there is a time when we go back, and everybody, probably when we die, you do not physically go to each reality. But there is a resonance. How did the entire world resonate with Tagore, for example? This is the way one tries to tune oneself. It's a way of perfecting oneself. That how do I listen to each and every voice which is quivering in the environment? That is my job, I would say. My connectivity in that sense, even if it's impeded in a physical sense for a few months, it doesn't alter me as a person. That's how I would like to put it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing that when you were talking about Tagore, I remember another great poet from Odisha, Bhima Bhoi. He was a tribal, and his word was not very vast, but he always is talking about Jagat, talking about the universe, and he's connecting himself with every human being. So, Radhaji were talking about Tagore. Amitaji was also talking about Tagore. And Tagore is the poet who opened the window, who opened our viewpoint to the world. And he connected us to the Asian sensibility. He connected us to the global sensibility of modern time. But today's politics, when you look at the politics of today, even during this terrible tragedy, we are hugely divided. We are completely isolated to each other. We are fighting with our neighbors. We are again, there is a polarized world. There are power centers who wants to dominate. So in this time, how you see the connection of our mind with others, when we suspect each other, when we don't have much trust to each other, how we are going at it, how we are moving, and what is our future as human race?
Uh, that's a very big question. The future of the entire human race is something I think everybody is thinking about. And I think what has happened is that the pandemic, as I said earlier, has closed us physically into our homes, but it has opened our imaginations and made us ask these big questions about not just what is our personal future, but what is the future of our world. And it has, in some ways, made us rethink some of our priorities. And here, since we are talking about Tagore, I want to just refer to a famous story of Tagore, which most people know, called Street Patro, or the wife's letter, where we
Hmm.
see how a young woman, the daughter-in-law of a family, a joint family, who feels very confined and oppressed in her marital home, eventually, by the end of the story, plucks up the courage to leave her home, and she reaches Puri, and from the shores of the ocean, she writes her first letter to the husband she has left behind about the expansion of her sensibilities and how she has awakened to a new sense of her individuality and her freedom. And she says, and I'm just reading a couple of lines from the English translation of the story by Supriya Chaudhary, which I carried in my big volume, The Essential Tagore, where she writes, "Today I have come on a pilgrimage to the seat of Lord Jagannath in Puri, while you remain tied to your work in your office." She's writing this to her husband. She says, "I am the second daughter in law of your father's house. Today, after 15 years standing by the ocean's shore, I have learned that I have a different relation as well with the world and the Lord of the world. That is why I have taken courage to write this letter." She says, "At the end of the story, I am no longer afraid. The blue ocean is before me today, and the rain clouds of Ashad are gathered overhead. You had shrouded me over in darkness of your habits and customs. Today, having come out, I find no vessel to contain my glory. That beauteous one is gazing at me through the whole sky. The second daughter in law is dead at last. I too shall live. At last I live." Now, this sense of connection coming out of the smallest personal self to get to the greater self that connects with the world and the whole universe, that awareness and that movement in this story, which is captured, and the image of the vast ocean. I think that kind of imagination literature can bring to us even in the closed doors of our homes. And this is the way in which words have the power. She finds the words to write this letter to her husband when her mind opens out to her connectedness with the universe. So the sense of connectedness is, I think, what we through our words have to cling to at this time when we are all separated from each other and socially distanced.
Yeah, that's a very important point you're making. Anita ji, I was talking to one of my friend, Aruna Mahathi. She's a dancer. She told me, unless this lockdown happened, I did not know that I have a garden. I did not know that there are so many trees in the compound of my home, because I was so busy with my dance classes and other things that I had no time to see how my trees look and how they grew up. So, this is another reality, that knowing your own uh, surrounding, to be intimate with nature. So many writers are talking about nature nowadays, which was completely banished for a long time. We're not talking about nature. We're not talking about our connectedness with trees, with birds. So in many Mumbai writers, they're writing about flamingos. So how you look at these things, that reconnecting with nature? Actually, did we arrive in a time when we are bound, we are forced to reconnect ourselves with the nature?
Kedaji, this period of our isolation has been rather long. And I am seeing how the situation is changing every week, I would say. I must tell you, you will be familiar with that, and Radhaji also knows. In my writing, nature plays a very, very important role. It is a very important backdrop. And I have never been able to see human beings isolated from nature. My team has mostly been focused on areas of where people are intimately connected with the forest, where they depend on each other, every village is friendly. So initially when I came to Bombay in the month of March, yes, it is true that all this happened to me. I listened to the birds more. I recorded the bird calls. We stayed in a very beautiful campus, and I started watching the trees. I know how the fall, the yellowish leaves fall in the on the ground. But I must tell you that in a situation like this, when every day things are happening, this state of mind for me did not last more than 2 weeks. I was so torn apart by the experiences of people that was happening all over the country. Today you mentioned Radhaji's poem, a beautiful and very stark poem she has written on the pandemic time. You have written a very powerful poem which I read on the migrants moving, and
Thank you.
I somehow feel that I am kind of being torn apart with whatever is happening in the country. I mean, I literally spend sleepless nights thinking of how things could have been altered. I am also in the civil service, so there is always a part of my mind which is innocent, logical, functional, which thinks that could we not have prevented this crisis? Could we not have prevented the human suffering? What more could have been done? How could we have gone to them? We kept on calling friends who are in different places, in different states, and I realized, I'm very sorry to say this, that at a time of this nature, the comfort you get from your garden or the nature surrounding you, it gets completely disrupted. I became so integrated with things happening all over the country, people's journeys, I would say, but there are situations of joblessness, situations of hunger, people not finding ways of
Right.
communicating. There is no way of communicating to people who can communicate, they won't. So all this together disrupted my mind, and that disruption, I must say, is something not totally negative. It is my way of acknowledging the presence of a large universe around my own area of thinking. And I felt that it was very painful for me. I kept on writing my own diary. I kept on writing the way I write newspaper articles. As a critic of development, I have always been writing. I kept on writing poems. I mean, I am myself very surprised how stark my poems have become in this time. So this took me out of nature and realization of my own house corner. It threw me out open, almost in I would say in bloodied pieces of my existence outside. And I suffered. It's almost like I fall. What is this other fall upon the thorns of life? I bleed. No, I don't know whether it's totally wrong. So this realization came that yes, there are times of crisis like this, when even intimacy with nature cannot actually solve your, you know, I mean, cannot actually give you tranquility.
Okay. Actually, I wanted to ask this question to Anita ji, but I am passing this question to Radha ji, and then I will come back to Anita ji. Anita ji was talking about writing about tribals and their life, and you had worked on the writings of Mahasweta Devi. So, before this pandemic, we have seen a series of displacement, and the most threatened life is of our tribals. They are living a life where they do not know what is going to happen to their life. Actually, they are standing on the crossroad. They don't know whether to be with their own natural surrounding, or they are forced to displace. After displacement, they do not know where to go, and they are displaced multiple times, not once. I have seen people who are displaced at least 12 or 13 times. So, in that reality, when we are talking about people, those displaced people, those people who are forced to come back to their villages, but in villages they are not welcome. what is how am I going to deal with them? What is their place in our literature? As a writer, how I connect with them? Radha.
Yes. I think you're asking again a very key question, which is about how writing gives the writer a place of privilege, because you have access to language, you have access to the written word, and you have access to a certain intellectual privilege of trying to interpret the world and then communicate that vision creatively to your readers. And this position of privilege is precisely what is denied to the people you're talking about, the people of the tribes, the displaced people from the margins, whom sometimes the author may write about, but whose reality the writer does not actually inhabit. In these situations, I think there is a distance, and we're talking distances from the beginning of this discussion. Of course, we talked of social distancing, but there is indeed a literal social distance between the intellectual and creative world of the writer, with her language and her access to knowledge and writing and the written word, and the world of the underprivileged. But from that position of privilege, the writer has a choice, which is one is to remain confined to your own aesthetic sphere and operate within it, aloof from these harsher realities around you, or to engage with those realities where, even if you are not talking necessarily directly to the people you're writing about, you're writing to your readers about things that people generally like to wear blinkers about, and things that live our daily lives in a certain kind of willed blindness about. So the writer wants to, who is socially committed, the writer with that kind of transformative vision wants to remove that blindfold, and this awareness to sensitize the world, to sensitize the reader, is can be an important way of working from your position of privilege to bring the awareness of the written word to a wider circle of people. And here I speak not only of the writer, but I would say translation, which is also an important sphere of my own range of work. Translation also can work in a very big way to in this process of transmission of awareness, this transmission of the expansion of sensitivities and sympathies, and that I think is very important, because for anything to change, the first step is awareness, and words have a lot of potential for that.
Yes, well, Radha is talking as an academician. She is interpreting the whole thing as an academician. But Anita ji, you are a civil servant. You work with those people, and sometimes you have taken decisions which may not be so pleasing to you. So how you deal with those contradictions, being a civil servant and being a writer, being sympathetic to their the reality of the people, their love for their own place, but being an agent of displacement. How did you deal this contradiction as a civil servant and as a writer?
You have asked a question which is so close to my mind and my experiences. You have been talking about people who have been displaced multiple times. Yes, I have been to this place, Raigada district, spoken to the tribal women extensively. The Indravati project has displaced them once. They have again been displaced because of bauxite mining. I have seen the reality of their lives. And I have seen that it's a very, very difficult choice. As a civil servant, when you try to speak for the people, there are obvious constraints. I have become in the process probably more of a free human being and less of a civil servant, which obviously has implications and cost in terms of the choices we make. But I remember the time of my life when I was the first director of rehabilitation in Odisha of the water resources projects, and
Right, right.
we were implementing the new rehabilitation policy. The new rehabilitation policy, for understanding the problems, I used to actually go to the field and go and listen to people. These used to be traumatic experiences. There are places in Bengali area, where the Bengali submergence was happening, where a village has been declared as submerged, but yet people have not actually moved. I've seen that trauma. There have been days when I would just go listen to them. Thousands of people around me, they're crying, they're cursing, they are saying the ridiculous is poison. Then I sit down with them, listen out with them, how best rehabilitation can be done, because many times we see the choices have been made without consulting the people. So we try to get into the process once again, make a proper rehabilitation plan. That's the best I could have done in the situation. But one thing I made it very clear to myself and my team, that when people are speaking, when they're angry, when they're agitated, just sit and listen. After some time, you'll stop crying, you'll cool down, and you know how people in Odisha are. They will say, "Arey jio kiसी खाने chila, पकड़ू अस्ची." We are only shouting at her. We have not given her anything. They gave me tea, they take me in their houses. What trust, what affection. So I have always felt that my main chief duty as a civil servant is my accountability to people. I remember when
Right.
this rehabilitation policy, which was considered very liberal those days by the engineers and also by people who were trying to promote industries. I used to be called anti-development in official sentences, but I did not bend down. I remember that I have stuck to my stand. I have been often, criticized by my own colleagues, who are my former colleagues now, but I did not bend my stand. The job I tried to do, including the choices of people, including the best possible option. Because in rehabilitation of displacement, the thesis is you have to taken a displacement quality of life. I have tried my best, but it is true that it is not a broken job. That is why it's very important that wherever you do and work, you take people along with you. You take the panchayat, you take the people's representative, and you stand with them. But you have to make a clear choice, which our Mussoorie Academy director Appu had told us. There is nothing called a non-committed bureaucracy. You have to be committed, and your commitment is to the communist party, to the marginal. This is something I've learned and tried to do my best, but I don't know. I might have failed also. I'm always ready to learn.
Yes, it's a very difficult position to be a committed bureaucrat and to be a committed poet in one place. So, Radhaji, I'm shifting a bit to a different world. That the question of gender. That when we are talking about creative connectedness, creative connectivity, do you see a gender question, or do you see there is a gender perspective to it, that as a woman, as a woman, you see this question from a different level, from a different side? Is it something very different to be a woman?
The gender question is central to most of the work I do, because as a woman, one of course experiences every day the fact that we live in a very heterogeneous world, and that the same truth does not apply to everybody and every context and every situation. And much of my own work, both as a scholar and as a translator and as a writer, has dealt with this issue. In fact, the example I drew from Tagore's writing was also a story where Tagore, in many ways, was ahead of his time in the way in which he addressed the gender issue. Yes, the question of heterogeneity and differences is what the question of gender throws into relief. And we see this also in the struggle of women to articulate themselves in writing, historically, not just in our country, but in so many cultures across the world. So, in some of my writings, I have, and in some of the anthologies I have edited, one has tried to foreground the voices of women from different backgrounds. One has translated the writings of Bengali women writers, short stories across an entire century, and Anita Agnihotri's story Aguner Bhitor, Within the Furnace, is part of that collection, Vermilion Clouds. And we see through the evolution of those narratives another alternative history of the way there is this important facet to Bengali literature and to Indian literature, which very often gets invisibilized in more general histories of literature. Likewise, in some of my edited anthologies of women's writings from South Asia, I have an anthology called Body Maps, which is about how women writers have represented the body in their works. There again, and I have another anthology called Writing Feminism, South Asian Voices, which I co-edited with the Bangladeshi writer activist Selima Hossein. There we place next to each other, we juxtapose the voices of women from not just different parts of India writing in different languages, but narratives from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, and we see how these voices speak to each other and yet map a very diverse territory. And there are certain common themes and issues which emerge precisely from these conversations between these writers, which happen when you read their works together. And I think this kind of thinking, this kind of practice matters at a time when we have all become so particular about borders separating us from what is around us. And we are so hardened in our position on political borders that sometimes we forget to think across those borders. And I think literature, language, communication, writing, translation, and the kind of anthologies that I have with this intention created, these enable the human imagination to cross those boundaries. You were asking about gender. Well, the crossing of gender boundaries is not just something about one's biological identity. It is a state of mind. And Tagore was a writer who was remarkable in his ability to get inside the minds of women and to create very powerful women characters. So the idea of crossing boundaries is something that literature and language enables.
So, Anitaji, my very pointed question to you will be that how difficult or how important it is to be a woman, and as a woman to be a civil servant and also to be a writer. How important it is or how difficult it is?
I think nothing is easy for a woman, but it all depends upon um, how do you make choices in life. In civil service, women have always been very small in number. It is true. Certain facts, the issues of political and historical disadvantages cannot be changed overnight. As women writers, well, there are certain problems, certain barriers, but I have somehow felt that this Radhaji put very well in when she spoke. She said it is a question of how you cross the border. It is not a question of your physical existence alone, your mind. And as I have myself moved out to the open world, traveling, transacting with people, and fixing their realities, I also find there is some kind of advantage being a woman because I have seen how the women who constitute 50% of our world, how they trust and how they have made me one of their own. When I have traveled in the field, how they have got their hospitality, been with them. And I remember when in my Mohuldiha days, which is the first story, first novel I wrote, it is It is of course not totally autobiographical, but large part of it is a reality of Sundargarh district where I work as a district magistrate. There, the woman, she says that now we have someone in the team, as a leader of the team, to whom we can show the injuries of our back. So I thought it is very important. This actually happened in my life that this kind of sharing, this kind of bonding has been possible only because I was, by realities of my life, a woman. And I would say that I have tried to uh, assimilate this, enjoy as much as possible, and I've engaged myself in the company of not only women, I would say, but men and women all have been there. But in particular, the realities of lives of women, their struggle, the way they share work, the way they cultivate the land, the way they collect the forest produce, the way they rear their children, and the huge burden of running the society and family which they encounter at the same time. They are the builders of kinship. It is they who, by their labor, which is mostly unpaid, take the world forward. I have learned my life's lessons from them. And chronicling their, you can call it sorrow, you can call it their realities of life. It has been one of the important tasks I have taken upon myself, and I have enjoyed doing it. In fact, the
Yeah,
thing
there is
that he was mentioning, the bride's lament, which is there in one of her uh, anthologies, where a bride who have, it is again a story of this Kalahandi Nuapada area, a girl who has left her mother's house, got married, then she comes back one day, about the Karnagitis, and she says that the space in the family where she was living has been taken away by others. She is not able to find a home. She's not able to find a bed. Somebody else is sleeping there. She's not able to find that box. And she is lamenting and asking, telling her mother that if I was a son, would you have been able to cast me away like this? It is only because I'm a daughter, my entire space has been taken away. I would say that this kind of empathy, you need a person like Tagore to be universal in your appreciation. But being a limited human being, I always feel fortunate that being a woman, I have been able to see and empathize with. I don't know what I would have done if I were a, within quotes, man author.
Thank you, Anitaji. Radhaji and Anitaji, we have, up to now, we have been discussing about things, about the issues. Now let's come to your creative field. Actually, both of you are poets, so why don't you recite some of your poems? So let's start with Radhaji first.
Thank you, Kedarji, for asking me to read from my poems. I had shared with you recently one poem on the pandemic, which was recently published. But here I will read another shorter poem, which is going to be published in another international anthology on the pandemic. And this refers to the plight of the migrants, which also I had written about in the other poem. This one is called Another Exodus 2020. And I will read this and then a very short extract from my translation of the Chandravati Ramayana, just a few lines from there.
Oh,
Sorry, right. So
lovely.
this one,
I love that. The Chandramati Ramayana is always so very close to my heart, actually.
right. So I will read a few lines from there after this. Called Another Exodus 2020, like this. No seas part for their crossing. No promised land awaits them on that. Their years of toil deep, migrants of unbelonging. No grieving friends, no fond farewells as they commence the longest journey. Fear in a knapsack on the back, dream of home, a bundle on the head. They trudge their weary way together on a journey to nowhere. No signposts here. The sky their guide, and thirst for home their friend. No mask conceals their hunger. They do not wash their hands, calloused from days of work. On the road to nowhere, there is no water. The highway to oblivion is not sanitized. Sadness seeps like blood from soles of broken feet, leaving telltale narratives on the soil. But their flagging footsteps track their still unbroken faith in finding home as they march on the highway of their dreams, their longest journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that was one poem, and I'll here read a very short extract from the Chandrabati Ramayan, where, like a chorus, like a commentary on the action, there is a lyric, there is a song-like set of stanzas which show how nature is grieving on the day when Sita will go through the Agni Pariksha, her ordeal by
Okay.
fire, and it anticipates that through the way nature is grieving for Sita, because as we know, the Chandravati Ramayan is written from a woman's point of view, and Sita is at the heart of this narrative. So I'll just read a few lines from this lyric. Flow gently, O Sarayu, today. Sita, monarch's daughter, Ram's wife, will be banished to the forest by Raghumani Ram. Rise not, O sun. Hide your face in the clouds. See not the sorrow of Sita, accursed since birth. Blow not, O Pavan, god of the breeze. Can you bear the burden of this innocent's grief? Oh, the sky weeps and the wind weeps too. The river waters weep today. The stars in the sky are weeping as the night draws to an end. Oh, to what land will Sita go? Alas, in whose house will she live? Suddenly, flow gently today.
Thank you very much, Raji. And it reminds me another great poet of Odia, Gangadhar Meher. He wrote a small epic called Tapaswini, where he is writing about Sita's banishment. And when she is banished, Lakshmana is coming back, leaving her alone. How the nature is crying. And Tachahi Vihaga Mukhe Kandila Sevan. The forest was crying like birds, the weeping birds, and it's beautiful narrative. So now, Anitaji, love to listen to your poem.
I really loved the poem Radha read and her own poem and the translation. Somewhere everything connected so well in my mind. But I will read today because the presence of Kedarji reminds me so much of Odisha, and I miss so much because I
Yeah,
have not been.
I'm also listening you after 20 years or so. Actually, more than 20 years actually. Uh,
So I thought I will read out a poem. When I was started traveling in Odisha in connection, I discovered this enormity of nature, I would say, and diversity, different ways of people living. In fact, Odisha's own unwritten history. And I'm currently working on translation of Dr. Mahendra Mishra's oral epics of Kalahandi.
just right.
So this is something, but this is a little story which is I saw. It's not a story actually. It is like almost like an image. I was traveling in Mayurbhanj, and at the gateway of the Ghata, we call it the hill road, there is a temple of Duarshuni Devi. I think the pronunciation would be slightly different in Odia. We call it Duar Sini. In Bengali, we say Duar Shuni. So I wrote a poem, which is, I think it must be a 25 year back I've written it. It's called Dubdir Agyo Pore. So I'm remembering Odisha so much today that I want to read it out. Dubdir Age Opore. Duar Shuni Devi, আচ্ছা ঘুমিয়ে নাকি জেগে মাঘের দিন বাপের মতো ফুরিয়ে যায় বেলা সেগুন বনে ঘাই দিয়েছে ঝামর কালো মেঘে থমকে আছে ঘাটির মোড়ে সিঁদুর মাখা ঢেলা, যতই হাঁটি তোমার পেছনে টানে প্রচুর গাছ, সর্ষে ফুল, পোড়ামাটির ঘোড়া, মাটির পুতুল, অচল করি, মানত করে দানে, সাজিয়ে গেছে কারা সবাই, নিমের মাথা জোড়া, ন্যাকড়া কানির ঝান্ডা ওড়ে। সন্ন্যাসী এক ভুয়ো, সেদিন বনে 3 মানুষের থানার রক্ত দিয়ে কালো পাখির চান করালো। তোমায় দিয়ে দুয়ো, পোয়াতি বউ জ্যান্ত জ্বালায়, ছেলের মায়ে ঝিয়ে। পরাঞ্জলির অন্ধ মেয়ের জীবন ছিঁড়ে দূর থেকে যদি দুঃখী মানুষ তোমায় ডাকে, আকাশ হতে উড়ে খড়গ নাকি নামে তোমার, পেরিয়ে সাগর নদী। তোমায় ডাকে খরায় ধুধু নওয়াপাড়ার জেলে, হাড় বেরোনো গ্রাম যেখানে কঙ্কালেরা থাকে, বন্ধা মায়ের অজন্মা পুত, কুমারী মার ছেলে, গর্ভঘরের দুয়ার থেকে তারাও তোমায় ডাকে। আগুন দিন সাপের মতো খুশিয়ে আছে হাওয়া, দুয়ার নাকি দেবে, কে দেখেছে জীবন মরণ এমন লড়ে যাওয়া, সেগুন বনে গাছের লাঠে রক্ত আগে লেগে।
Thank you very much. It's so beautiful to listen you once again. Uh, Now I think we have almost taken 1 hour. But one last question I want to ask you both. Since both of you are translators, you have translated so many writers into Bengali, and Radhaji is translating into English. So, in translation, how do you see this connectivity? Whether the beauty of Bengali or the beauty of Odia, the rhythm. How do you see it in English, actually, Radhaji? Is it really possible to take it as it is? We know that there is a transmission loss, but how difficult it is to take the rooted sensibility of a language to a completely foreign, a completely different set of language.
Okay. I think that is the question and the challenge that every translator faces every time you begin and attempt to translate something. And the answer, of course, is that there is no such thing as a perfect translation, because there is no such thing as two languages that are identical, or two readers who are identical, or two cultures that are identical. So translation connects, but it also makes us aware of difference. And I think if we get trapped into this idea that a translation to be successful has to be 100% faithful and become a copy of the original, then I think it's a doomed to failure from the beginning. So I think we need to understand that things change when they cross borders, and we need to accept that translation is a dynamic process of communication, and how the original writer articulated his or her words, how you transform them in your in the target language, and how the reader in the target culture receives the translation. It's a whole dynamic process that has in it an element of inevitable transformation and unpredictability. And as a simple example of how meanings can change when text travels, I want to talk about how within Bengali, when I looked at the way in which poetry in Bangladesh travels to West Bengal in India, I noticed how in literatures or in Bangladesh of the emergence of a new name, occupies a very special meaning, because it comes to be associated with the deaths of the martyrs in the language movement. And the Krishna Chura, on the other hand, in Indian culture, including in Bengal, it is associated with something completely other. It is associated with the season, with the flamboyance of that season. It is associated with the erotic, with the romantic, and the flower has a different resonance altogether. So when I looked at the lines, for instance, and I'm going to read them out in Bangla and then in my English translation, just 4 or 5 lines from a poem by the famous Bangladeshi poet Shamsur Rahman, who is
Correct.
writing about Ekushe and the language movement and the bloodshed that went with it and the revolutionary spirit. The whole of that is embodied in the central image of the Krishna Chuda flower, which we call Gulmohar in Hindi. So I will read the Bangla lines and the English lines because I realize that this poem, when it moves to a different readership, what the Krishna Chura implies requires a great effort on the part of the translator and the reader to understand that which would become immediately apparent to a reader in Bangladesh. So I will read this as a marker of exactly the kind of border crossing and the risks and perils of that linguistic border crossing that happens with translation. আবার ফুটেছে দেখো কৃষ্ণচূড়া থরে থরে শহরের পথে পথে কেমন নিবিড় হয়ে কখনো মিছিলে কখনো বা একা হেঁটে যেতে যেতে মনে হয় ফুল নয় ওরা শহীদের ঝলকিত রক্তের বুদবুদ স্মৃতিগন্ধে ভরপুর একুশের কৃষ্ণচূড়া আমাদের চেতনারই রং. These are the Bangla words, and here is my informal English translation. Again, the blossom, clusters of Krishnachura in the city streets. How dense the blossoms, sometimes on a protest march or sometimes walking alone. I feel they are not flowers, but glistening bubbles of martyrs' blood, redolent with memories. On Ekushe, Krishnachura blossoms, the
Beautiful. Beautiful. Anitaji, this is my last question to you. Now, you are also a translator, so how you face this loss of loss in transmission actually? How you see that actually? Though you have translated many Odia writers into Bengali, and you know many tribal poems. You have in Mahanadi, you have seen the life, the past life of Odisha, and you have chosen to write it in Bengali. You know, I think you are the only writer. You know, there are many other writers who have written extensively also in Bengali, but you know, you have done something more actually. So that's how we are a little bit grateful to you, because we always have a complaint that this Bengali versus Odia. Bengali is not very generous to Odia, but very generously you have taken the life and sensibility of Odisha to Bengali literature. So how do you see that?
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me hear this beautiful reading and translation by Radha. It is so marvelous.
She has done very well.
So good.
Yes.
But you know, this is the way Radha ji translates. I would say much more competent. Her sensibilities are much more sharp. I'm not a translator like her, even though as a creative writer, I have tried to translate Ramakantara, Chaubhagya Mishra, then Sitakanta Mahapatra's poetry into Bengali. I have translated Dilip Chitre, into Bengali. And my concern has always been that I know I am not perfect. But like if you go to a village Mela, for example, you want to take something. This is what I've got. It's almost like this. I want to tell my let's see. This is what I got to the seashore, and this is the treasure. This is what I got for you. So it may not be perfect. Something must have been lost in the journey, but this is what I have this sensibility. But when you reminded me of one thing, my large number of short stories are written in the backdrop of Odisha, on people of Odisha. This entire this incident which happened in Kalinganagar, for example. There is a dam in Indravati, Nam Nain, a story on that. But interestingly, Mahanadi is a novel which is just Bengali because of the language. Mahanadi is an Odia novel. Everything there belongs to Odisha. From as it leaves Chhattisgarh, comes to Hirakud, then flows to Odisha, and flows to Odisha to different places, in Tikarpada, then it comes finally to Jagatsinghpur. And I feel that if people of Odisha do not read this novel, then it is never going to be fulfilling for them. That is why it is
I
now
think
done
I
into.
think someone is translating it into Odia, na?
Yes, yes. Mr. Kirot has
Firoz is doing that. Yeah.
completely translated it. He's just kind of touching upon the manuscript. But Mahanadi is a novel which is a Bengali novel and which is a completely Odia novel. So I do not know whether he will call it a translation, but it is almost a translation of all the Odia uh, stories, images, sensibilities, oral history, archaeology, livelihood, everything into Bengali. So this is something I tried, and I was slightly afraid how the Bengali readership will take it. But they took it so well, and I'm really very thrilled that now Professor Nivedita Sen is doing it in English, and Kirot Babu is doing it in Odia. So very soon we'll have people, from beyond Bengal and also people of Odisha reading it in two different ways probably. But I have never been a translator where I can claim as much merit as Radha can. But in my own way, I feel that it is probably not so important for me to be to others. You now need to go to English. If you want to translate Marathi into Tamil, you have to go to the English version.